In Nepal, at least 12 people have been killed after heavy monsoon rains triggered landslides in the mid-western and eastern regions. Officials say 30 people are believed to be missing and at least 20 are wounded. The Met Department has predicted that monsoon rains will last for another 3 days. UEFA has held the draw for the Champions League's one-leg quarterfinals and semi-finals at their headquarters in Switzerland. 2 quarterfinals were set by the draw, with Germany's RB Leipzig facing Atletico Madrid and Italian club Atalanta up against PSG. The quarterfinals, semis and final will be held next month in Portugal. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. The U.S. has recorded more than 65,000 people testing positive for COVID-19 in the past 24 hours. The countrywide cases have crossed 3.1 million with over 133,000 deaths. The global number of coronavirus cases has exceeded 12.2 million with the death toll nearing 555,000. This report has the details.
The new coronavirus is wreaking havoc in the Americas, tumbling records of daily deaths and infections. In the virus epicenter of Latin America, Brazil has reported over 1,200 deaths, while Mexico recorded 730 fatalities in the last 24 hours. Bolivia's President Janine Áñez has tested positive after Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro, who doctors say is recovering well. Meanwhile, U.S. infectious disease expert Dr. Anthony Fauci has blamed the unprecedented spike in cases on the haste to open up the economy. Doctors and nurses are struggling to cope as COVID-19 patients flood hospitals in over 36 states of the U.S. California is facing the double threat of rising coronavirus numbers as it enters peak wildfire season.
I want to encourage everybody in the same spirit of responsibility as it relates to mitigating the transmission of COVID-19 to see what we can do to mitigate the loss of lives and property by focusing on evacuation plans, focusing on the needs to do the kind of, well, just work at the house.
South Africa has announced its highest daily infections with over 13,500 testing positive. Africa's most developed country is now a hotspot with over 238,000 cases. Algeria is reimposing travel restrictions and has increased testing in a bid to stop a rise in infection. Over in Australia, Prime Minister Scott Morrison says the number of overseas arrivals will be capped at 4,000 people each week.
We also agreed today a reduction in the number of inbound arrivals into Australia across those ports that are able to accept visitors, returning Australian citizens and residents. Of course, there are no flights going into Melbourne, into Victoria, for obvious reasons.
In Asia, China has reported 4 new coronavirus cases, down from 9 a day earlier. South Korea's daily virus cases fell below 50, but imported cases and infections tied to churches continue despite enhanced measures.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, the death toll from COVID-19 has crossed 5,000 after another 75 people lost their lives. The Ministry of Health says more than 2,500 cases have been reported in the past 24 hours, with the tally crossing 243,000. The ministry said over 149,000 people have recovered from the virus so far. It said among over 89,000 active cases, 2,375 are critically ill. The province of Sindh is the worst hit with over 100,000 infections now, while Punjab has reported over 85,000 cases. Moreover, India has reported its biggest single-day surge in COVID-19 cases with more than 26,000 new infections. With another 475 deaths overnight, the nationwide toll is nearly 22,000. The Health Ministry said major cities like Delhi, Mumbai and Chennai were badly affected by the virus. The new cases take India's total number of infections to nearly 794,000. The Health Ministry says that there are over 276,000 active coronavirus cases in the country. In Nepal, at least 12 people have been killed after heavy monsoon rains triggered landslides in the midwestern and eastern regions. Officials say 30 people are believed to be missing and at least 20 are wounded. They say major rivers in the country have swollen due to the continuous downpour for the last 48 hours. The Met Department said the monsoon rains will last for another 3 days. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has signed a decree converting Istanbul's Hagia Sophia into a mosque. This comes after Turkey's top administrative court annulled the museum status of the 6th century building, and will give you the details regarding this development later. And for now, moving on to China, which says it will hit the US with reciprocal measures over fresh sanctions against Chinese politicians. Addressing the press, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian said Washington's move is deeply detrimental to bilateral relations. He said the US action marked a serious interference in China's internal affairs. This comes after Washington announced new curbs on 4 Chinese officials for alleged human rights violations against minorities. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said regional Communist Party boss Chen Guangguo's 3 officials and their families won't be allowed entry to the US. The act also mandates freezing any US assets and prohibitions on Americans doing business with them. The US has approved a $620 million upgrade package for Patriot surface-to-air missiles for Taiwan. The State Department said the upgrade will modernize Taipei's armed forces and help it to maintain a credible defensive capability. It said upgrading components of missiles will support an operational life of 30 years. Taiwan's defense ministry said the arms deal demonstrates the importance Washington attaches to Taipei's national security. The ministry said the arms sales will take effect in the next month, a 7th such deal during US President Trump's tenure. Taipei has been bolstering its defenses in the face of increased military moves by Beijing, which claims the island as its own territory. The US has approved an estimated $23 billion deal to sell 105 Lockheed Martin F-35 fighter jets to Japan. The State Department said maintaining Tokyo's effective self-defense capability is vital to the US interests. It said the proposed sale will not change the military balance in the region. In a press release, the Pentagon said Tokyo also requested 110 F-135 engines and related equipment. Pentagon's Defense Security Cooperation Agency said implementation of the proposed deal will take 25 years. North Korea says another summit with the US will be unnecessary and useless as long as there is no change in Washington's stance. Kim Yo-jong, the sister of North Korea's Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un, said Pyongyang will denuclearize, but Washington will have to take major steps. In a statement carried by the state media, she said the resumption of the talks depends on Washington ending its hostilities. Kim said Pyongyang will not give up the Yongbong nuclear complex in exchange for sanctions relief. She said Pyongyang will not alter its strategies just because North's leader and US President Donald Trump have a cordial personal relationship. Earlier, Trump and US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo expressed hope to reopen the stalled negotiations. The U.S. Department of State has invited Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov for a new round of talks on strategic stability. Earlier, Ryabkov announced that the consultations on strategic stability were set for mid-July. On June the 22nd, Russia and the U.S. held talks on arms control behind closed doors in Vienna. The country's delegations were headed by Ryabkov and U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Arms Control, Marshall Billingsley. The issue of extending the New START treaty was also on the agenda. Moscow and Washington have agreed on an initiative to form an expert group on security in outer space following talks in January. Russia says the risks of nuclear confrontation between Moscow and Washington have seriously increased recently. This comes as President Donald Trump announced U.S. withdrawal from the Open Skies Treaty in May. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Moscow is prepared to discuss control over new weapon systems with Washington. But the Foreign Minister said he was not optimistic that the New START nuclear arms control treaty will be extended. Earlier, Russia's defense ministry said it will take all the necessary measures over the U.S. withdrawal from the Open Skies Treaty. The agreement provides for inspection flights over member countries to monitor military activities. In Greece, violence broke out in Athens during a mass demonstration against the government's proposed law to curb public protests. Riot police fired tear gas and flash grenades at a group of protesters who hurled petrol bombs at them. The demonstrations were also held in 40 other cities apart from the capital. More than 10,000 peaceful protesters gathered in central Athens, many supporting a labor union backed by the Greek Communist Party. But Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis has not backed down, saying he is determined to stop gatherings from disrupting traffic and commercial activity.
The freedom for someone to be able to get to a hospital, to get to his job, to his home, to be able to go out for a walk with his kids is just as precious as the freedom to demonstrate. In a democracy, the right of one does not overrule the right of the rest.
More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. In Serbia, the government has scrapped plans to impose a weekend COVID-19 curfew in Belgrade after 2 nights of protests. A government crisis group tasked with fighting the virus has decided instead to ban public gatherings of more than 10 people. This came after violent clashes broke out between the police and people protesting the lockdown measures. Thousands violated the ban last night by staging a sit-in in front of the parliament amid heavy police presence. Meanwhile, Russia has rejected Serbian media reports alleging Moscow of fueling the unrest. Now, as earlier told, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has signed a decree converting Istanbul's Hagia Sophia into a mosque. This comes after Turkey's top administrative court annulled the museum status of 6th century building.
Hagia Sophia was first constructed as a cathedral in the Christian Byzantine Empire, but was converted into a mosque after the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople in 1453. It became a museum in 1934 under the rule of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. But the Council of State in its ruling said the 1934 cabinet decision of converting Hagia Sophia into a museum was illegal. The presidential decree hands control of the site to Turkey's religious directorate to reopen it for worship. The United States, Russia, and Greece, along with UNESCO, had expressed concerns ahead of the ruling. But President Tayyip Erdogan rejected international criticism as an attack on Ankara's sovereignty.
Moving on, Israeli forces have shot and martyred a Palestinian youth in the occupied West Bank. In a statement, Palestinian Health Ministry said the citizen was killed in Kofla Haris village near the northern city of Salfit. The incident took place after clashes broke out between Israeli soldiers and young Palestinians in the village. Health officials said the martyred youth succumbed to wounds after he was shot in the neck. Eyewitnesses said the Palestinian was shot in cold blood while out walking with his friends. Tensions in the region are high since Israel announced plans to annex major parts of the West Bank this month. French President Emmanuel Macron has asked Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to refrain from annexing Palestinian territories. In a statement, the Elysee Palace said Macron warned Netanyahu in a phone call that annexation will seriously harm peace efforts. The statement said Macron emphasized such a move will contravene international law. The president said annexation will jeopardize the possibility of a two-state solution. On Tuesday, Egypt, France, Germany and Jordan urged Israel to abandon plans to annex the West Bank. The foreign minister of the three countries warned such action can have consequences for bilateral relations. In a related development, a subcommittee in the U.S. House of Representatives has approved a measure that will restore aid to Palestinians. Trump administration cut off aid in 2018 after Palestinian officials dismissed the president's peace plan. Committee chairperson Nita Lowey introduced the amendment. The step will restore $255 million in aid to Palestine during the 2021 fiscal year, which begins on 1st of October this year. The amendment will effectively strip the authority of Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to suspend aid to the Palestinian territories. Now, he said non-governmental organizations working in the West Bank and Gaza will benefit from the funds. The Global Chemical Weapons Watchdog has voted to take action on a probe that blamed Syria for nerve gas attacks for the first time. In April, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons found the Syrian Air Force used sarin gas and chlorine on citizens in March 2017. Diplomats said Russia, China and Iran voted against the decision at the OPCW's Executive Council. The organization accused the Syrian government of breaching the Chemical Weapons Convention. British envoy to the bloc, Peter Wilson, said the countries had voted to act on the investigation and identification team report. He said 29 votes were in favor, 9 against, with 9 abstains. Earlier this week, OPCW Chief Fernando Arias said the team is investigating further incidents in Syria. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says his government is trying to mitigate the economic impact of the coronavirus outbreak. He said this while announcing a subsidy of $180 million for the Naya Pakistan housing project in Islamabad. He urged investors to take advantage of the government's incentives. The Prime Minister said that taxes have also been reduced in the provinces due to the pandemic. Khan said the government has decided to keep the economy running through the housing and construction sector. Pakistan has reopened Angur at the border crossing with Afghanistan to resume trade between the two countries. The crossing was closed down in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic to contain the spread of the virus. The border points in Torkham, Chaman and Ghulam Khan have already been opened since June the 22nd. Pakistan has already reopened its border with Iran. Moving on, Pakistan's Minister for Human Rights, Dr. Shiri Mazari, has written a letter to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights about the worsening situation in Indian-occupied Kashmir. In a letter addressed to the Commission Chair, Michelle Bachelet, the minister expressed grave concern over India's illegal annexation of the occupied valley. Dr. Mazari highlighted the forcible transfer of civilian populations to and from Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. She said that India has issued around 25,000 Indian citizens domicile certificates in occupied Jammu and Kashmir in a blatant violation of 4th Geneva Convention. Mazari called for an urgent intervention by the UN High Commissioner to end the breaches of fundamental human rights norms. In Nepal, cable operators have banned all the Indian news channels except the government-owned Doordarshan television. They took the decision amid mounting tensions over a map row between Kathmandu and New Delhi.
Although the decision has not been taken by the Nepalese government, Information Minister Yubaraj Khatiwala says Nepal may seek political and legal remedies against Indian media for attacking Nepal's sovereignty and dignity. This comes in the wake of public outrage against Indian media for its coverage, which citizens claimed portrayed Nepalese leadership in a bad light. Indian news channels indulged in character assassination of Nepalese leaders and of the Chinese envoy to Nepal, Ambassador Ho Young-ki. India and Nepal are currently engaged in a diplomatic scuffle after the Nepalese parliament claimed ownership of 3 disputed areas. New Delhi contests Kathmandu's claim.
Indian police have shot dead a man accused of ordering the killing of 8 policemen in the northern state of Uttar Pradesh. This marks yet another example of extrajudicial killing in Prime Minister Narendra Modi's India. Dubey accused in 60 criminal cases of various offences, including attempted murder. 2 of Dubey's aides were also killed in last week's violence. With a population of over 200 million, crime and corruption have long plagued the state of Uttar Pradesh. Sudan's Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok has replaced the finance, foreign, energy and health ministers and 3 others as part of a sweeping reshuffle. In a statement, the government said Hamdok has named interim replacements to lead all the 7 ministries. Hamdok leads a government of technocrats under a 39-month power-sharing agreement between the military and civilian groups. The agreement was reached following the removal of the country's longtime ruler, Omar al-Bashir, last year. The cabinet reshuffle comes 9 days after violent protests against government's coronavirus response and economic crisis. It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Welcome back. The UN rights body says at least 3 people have been killed during protests in Congo, triggered by plans to name a new election commission chief. In a tweet, the United Nations Joint Human Rights Office said it was concerned about the use of lethal force by law enforcement. It said 2 protesters and a police officer were killed during the protests. The protesters were upset at the appointment of Ronsard Malonda as president of the Independent National Electoral Commission. The National Assembly ratified Malonda nomination last week, but is yet to be signed off by the president. Libya has announced the resumption of oil production and exports after nearly a 6-month shutdown due to the ongoing conflict in the country. In January, forces loyal to Khalifa Haftar blocked the output, claiming they want a fair distribution of the oil revenues managed by Tripoli. The national oil company said the output will take time to return to previous levels as the blockade has caused significant damage to the reservoirs. It said the oil production's halt has caused losses of more than $6.5 billion. The company called the resumption an important step to national recovery. Russia says it has started the final stage of clinical trials of a potential COVID-19 vaccine. The medicine is being developed by the Gamaleya Scientific Research Institute of Epidemiology and Microbiology jointly with the Defense Ministry. In a statement, the Defense Ministry said participants of the first and the second groups are showing an immune response after injections. It said the vaccine will protect people against the virus for more than 2 years. Clinical testing of the vaccine began on June 18th. Meanwhile, Health Minister Mikhail Mushakov says Russia will have at least 3 or 4 coronavirus vaccines. The minister earlier announced that the country had 17 promising vaccines for the coronavirus. France says the spire of a Notre Dame Cathedral, which was destroyed in a fire last April, will be restored according to the original Gothic design. This announcement comes after a meeting of the country's National Heritage and Architecture Commission. President Emmanuel Macron announced the decision, putting an end to speculation that the spire will be rebuilt in a modern style. The president said he wants the restoration to be completed by 2024, when Paris is hosting the Olympics. The Wall Street stocks have struggled at the open as investors weighed a record number of new coronavirus cases in the U.S. The indices of S&P 500 and Dow Jones Industrial Average traded marginally higher. Technology stocks weighed the most on major bourses, while the Nasdaq Composite Index was down at a fraction. And now the weather situation from around the globe. That's all for now. With the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.